matter of fact, I wrote a model based on his work, The Philosophical Aspects of Cultural Difference. And I'm only going to hit on one theme, because his work deals with axiology, epistemology, worldview. It's just a long process, but I'm going to only just zero in on axiology. He starts by explaining that we arrive at our primary value systems as groups of people, cultural groups or ethnic groups, if you will, based on one basic principle, and that's a principle of survival, which has lots of layers to it. But he talks about that fundamentally being the foundation of what a group knows and believes. And that the European axiology or primary value system is member or man to the object. Highest value lies in the object or in the acquisition of the object. And that object began many, many thousands of years ago in North Central Europe. And that object had a lot to do with what they needed to survive. What might that object be? Food. Fundamental. 5,000 to 8,000 years ago in North Central Europe, you needed food. And there wasn't much of it. And so part of what they learned and what they had to contend with was living in an environment where it was very harsh, very cold, very short planting seasons. They were considered supreme deer hunter when they were deer around, and they worshiped trees. These are the things we know about what is known as barbaric Europe during that period of time. Now I want to contrast that with the African and the Latino axiology, which is man to man, member to member. Highest value lies in the relationship between people.
Did you hear that, family? Dr. Joy DeGruy says our highest values lie in our relationships. Do you see why it was systematically destroyed by chattel slavery? Our family values were utterly ruined. The ties that bind us together as a people, as a tribe, and as a nation have been destroyed. And as a result, we've lost sight of our highest values. By contrast, this European Babylonian system that we were sold into is based on man-to-object acquisition. It destroys the things that should matter most to us. In this session, we will look at the many ways this system has taught us to reject Jacob and why we have so much trouble seeing past our pain.
5,000 to 8,000 years ago, tropical Africa, South America. How much time do you have to plant and grow your food? So what's the rush? We're not going to rush because we have plenty of time. We have plenty of time. Not only that, we have plenty of resources. If we run out of, roots, we'll fish. If we don't fish, we'll pick berries, but we'll get it done. And so we have a very different frame of reference and much of the focus. And of course, it had more to do than with food. It had more to do than just looking about and seeing what those physical resources was, but it had to do with what were the human resources necessary to survive. And those human resources were a collective, hence tribe, hence the notion of village. And so as African people, the primary value system that we had was one of being together. Now this is perfectly illustrated in something as simple as greeting. Every cultural group has its own greeting. How do Asians greet traditionally? They bow, right? When you begin to look at a very different thing, you look at European greeting. And European greeting, again, it's a reflection of their primary value systems. And their greetings is perfunctory. It's a perfunctory greeting. Hello, how are you? How do you do? How do you do what? My white friends are going, okay, Joy, you know, it was just a greeting. That's all it was. Say hello. Because it's perfunctory. It's not, you know, it's just a formality. You gotta do it. Okay, now when Africans and Latinos greet, it's ceremonial, is it not? Think about it. We greet in ways that I don't think anybody else on the planet greets. I'm going to test it out today. Sir, could you stand up over here on the end? This brother here, stand up. Stand on up. Come on, stand on up. Okay. Let's see. Let's find somebody over here that, let me see. This brother here in the gray. Could you stand up, please, sir? Yes, you. And could you come over and greet this man? Could you meet him halfway and go in and greet him? Just want you to greet him. What I'm trying to say, as you know, it can get into a snap and slap and all kind of stuff goes on, right? And Latinos will pick you up, kiss you, or slap you in the face, all kind of stuff goes on, right? Because the greeting is to establish the what? The relationship. Highest value lies in the relationship, right? So these are things that become very important, and it's something that has transferred beyond one generation. It's gone over generations. It's not like someone taught you that, really. You know, when you're walking down the street and you're in the grocery store and you go, you know, whenever I used to have my white friends with me, they go, Joy, you know so many people. How you know? I don't know them people, but I'm gonna greet them. You know, and greeting becomes something very important. And you think about it, even your children. You know, when you have children, can you come in the house and walk past Aunt Dolores? Not and live. Didn't you see Aunt Dolores? And then you got people you try to not see, try to not acknowledge somebody that you know when you're out. Oh, wait a minute. You too good to speak? You too good? You know, all kinds of stuff can go awry with that. Right? So greeting becomes very important. Now I want you to consider something else. I want you to consider what something like American chattel slavery did to the relationship. A people whose whole existence, fundamental to their survival, was their relationships. There was nothing that could have more devastated a group of people whose primary value system was the relationship than American chattel slavery. It destroyed and devastated relationships.
This session will be a bit different, but I believe it's needed, particularly now as many of us are beginning to wake up to the truth about who we are. When we understand that we are the royal family of the Most High, it should move us to desire His perfect will for our people. Did you know that one of the things that our Father values most is also relationships? When I said we will look at the many ways we still reject Jacob, what I mean is that the many dysfunctions in our homes, families, and communities is a direct result of the Willie Lynch mindset that taught us to hate the true essence of who we are. We've learned how to hate the ones we should love, the seed of Jacob, our brothers and our sisters. Isn't that crazy? How did we get here? Let's look at this 9th chapter of Amos because I believe it will answer that question. It begins with a declaration from the Most High regarding the judgment and ruin that would come to His people, and it ends with a promise that He would raise up the ruins. Now, as I'm reading this, I want you to imagine a parent who is just fed up with a disobedient and rebellious child. It's now time to administer the type of chastisement that will leave an indelible impression on this child that this parent means business. And I call it the royal beatdown. So let's read this. It says, I saw the Lord standing upon the altar, and he said, smite the lintel of the door that the posts may shake. Now, if your doorposts are broken, it shows that the whole house is in bad shape, because doors provide a critical level of protection. It says, and cut them in the head, all of them. I will slay the last of them with the sword. He that fleeth of them shall not flee away, and he that escapeth of them shall not be delivered. Though they dig into hell, thence shall mine hand take them. Though they climb up to heaven, thence will I bring them down. And though they hide themselves in the top of Carmel, I will search and take them out thence. And though they be hid from my sight in the bottom of the sea, thence will I command the serpent, and he shall bite them. And though they go into captivity before their enemies, note that he calls them their enemies. Thence will I command the sword, and it shall slay them, and I will set mine eyes upon them for evil and not for good. So he begins saying that it does not matter where they try to hide. He's saying basically they can run, but they're not going to hide from this judgment. I'm going to find them wherever they are. So he says, and the Lord God of hosts is he that touches the land. Now he's talking about his power and his majesty. And he says, and it shall melt, and all that dwell therein shall mourn, and it shall rise up wholly like a flood, and shall be drowned as by the flood of Egypt. It is he that buildeth his stories in the heaven, the different levels in the heavens, and hath founded his troop in the earth. He that calleth for the waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. The Lord is his name. He says, are ye not as children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel, saith the Lord? Have not I brought up Israel out of the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Captor, and the Syrians from Kir? Behold, the eyes of the Lord God are upon the sinful kingdom, and I will destroy it from off the face of the earth, saving that I will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob, saith the Lord. For lo, I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve. Yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. All the sinners of my people shall die by the sword, which say, the evil shall not overtake nor prevent us. Note that the kingdom would be destroyed, but he says he will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob. The people would then be sifted among all nations. There's an interesting point here that I don't want us to miss. Let's take a look at this. I want us to see this because sometimes we may overlook some key details. Even though he's chastening his people, it says in verse 9, for lo, I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve. Yet, he says, yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. Did you catch that? So he's purging away everything that should not be there. Even though the process we've gone through is painful, it's hard, but even the pain is purposeful. What remains will be useful to the master. You all, we know that we were sifted, but now we need to look at the impact. We can look at the history to get an idea of how it affected us physically. But do we really understand how it affected us emotionally and mentally? Do we really understand how much we've lost? Listen to this clip of Dr. Joy talking about post-traumatic slave syndrome.
There's a kind of a fundamental basis for post-traumatic slave syndrome. How many of you are familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder? But when we start talking about chattel slavery, we're not talking about one trauma. We're not talking about a specific event. We're talking about generations of trauma with no intervention. Based on what I know about sugar plantations, tobacco, and the Caribbean, what I know about American chattel slavery and the plantations there, does anyone right now ever recall mental health assistance to slaves? Anybody remember sending in the therapist after I sold off your son, daughter, raped folks? At any point? Never. Second question. After slavery was officially over, now you're free. Anybody remember any therapy then? We know it's been rough, it's been deep for you, it's been difficult. We're going to do a little group therapy. Anybody remember that? That would be no. Number 3, after slavery officially ended, both in the States, in the Caribbean, the British ended, do you remember whether or not trauma continued? Did the trauma continue for people of African descent? I need to know. Okay, so now let's do the math. Hundreds of years of trauma, no treatment. Freed, more trauma, no treatment. What do you do the math? Do you think there may be residual impacts of that trauma? Of course there is. It didn't end, friends, and it hasn't ended yet. So I think on one point, African people and people of African descent are extremely resilient. Matter of fact, I think we're a miracle. Far be it for us to pathologize or to look and cast this idea of weak and sick people. Oh, on the contrary, we are profoundly resilient because we've done everything we've done thus far with no help, with not even the ability to have this discussion. As though it were possible, we escaped injury in all those hundreds of years and the years that follow. So this kind of journey I'm going to take you on is going to be one that really gives a perspective on what this trauma was, what it looks like, and clinically, what is post-traumatic stress disorder? What does it look like? Now, let me give you a little snapshot. We'll get into it in more depth a little later. But post-traumatic stress disorder, if in fact you are diagnosed with that, again, remember, direct or indirect trauma, here are some of the symptoms. A feeling of foreshortened future. Now, what does that mean? A feeling, well, you're not going to live long. How many of you are running into young people that don't believe they're going to make it past their 20s? Feeling of foreshortened future. Exaggerated startle response. Outbursts of anger. Difficulty falling or staying asleep. Hypervigilance. Right? These are symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is like DSM stuff, Diagnostic Statistical Manual Mental Disorders. It's in there. And there's a whole listing of all these symptoms. Now, I want to roll it back so you can understand what the transmission theory is, because I'm going to talk about transmission. So how does a person that's been traumatized by post-traumatic, literally has a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, and can we, if we are logical and we are reasonable people, assume that a fair number of Africans had to have had post-traumatic stress disorder? You think? I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about them. Untreated, though, right? Okay, so now let's do the math. Mom, who saw dad sold or sister raped, has post-traumatic stress disorder. Still mom, though, right? Only mom now has outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future, difficulty falling or staying asleep, hypervigilance. That would be mom. Now, Johnny or Mary or Shaquisha did not have the original trauma. But what are they learning? This is called social learning theory. What am I normalizing? Exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger. Are you following me? So I didn't have to be traumatized. Now, the other thing is, do you think Johnny and Mary got traumatized too? Do you see? So what happens in your environment, you learn from the significant others in your environment. And if they're broken, guess what you're going to be? You're learning from broken people. And you're normalizing that behavior. And then it becomes, years later, 2008, that's their culture.
So when we consider that we have had generations of trauma that continues until this day, none of us can say that we have not been impacted in some way. None of us escaped the injury, because even if the abuse didn't happen to you physically, those around you witnessed it. Think about the trauma of the KKK riding through, burning crosses in the front yard, or burning homes. Or think about this. Why was it necessary to lynch someone and then leave the body there for all to see? These acts were done purposely to reinforce the trauma. The message they wanted to send was very clear. And when we hear about these things happening today, where does it take you back to in your mind? I want to share an excerpt from this article. This is from Cordis, a European Commission research group, and it says DNA can carry memories of traumatic stress down the generations. Let's listen to this. It says the starting point for the MEMOTV project was an understanding that the entire human organism, including the parts responsible for information processing, principally the brain, immune, and endocrine systems, are shaped not only by original experiences, but also crucially by the memories of those experiences. I'll drop down. It says this lasting change in the brain's organization and function can be self-perpetuating, whereby a stage dubbed the defense cascade can be triggered by events, often subtly resulting in undesirable behavior. So there is a method to their madness. What they're saying is we want to send a message to the entire race, even if we attack just one. I also want to share an excerpt from this article from the BBC Future entitled, "Can the Legacy of Trauma Be Passed Down the Generations?" So this was a study that was done on the children and grandchildren of prisoners of war after the Civil War. Interestingly, you won't find them doing a study on the trauma they inflicted on us during slavery, but let's keep going. It says, in 1864, nearing the end of the U.S. Civil War, conditions in the Confederate prisoner of war camps were at their worst. There was such overcrowding in some camps that the prisoners, Union Army soldiers from the North, each had the square footage of a grave. Prisoner death rate soared. For those who survived, the harrowing experiences marked many of them for life. They returned to society with impaired health, worse job prospects, and shorter life expectancy. But the impact of these hardships did not stop with those who experienced it. It also had an effect on the prisoners' children and grandchildren, which appeared to be passed down the male line of families, while the sons and grandsons had not suffered the hardships of the POW camps, and if anything were well provided for through their childhoods, they suffered higher rates of mortality than the wider population. It appeared the POWs had passed on some element of their trauma to their offspring. Now, one of the things that I found really cruel is the fact that our ancestors were forced to watch the brutalities committed against family members and friends. Just think about that. How do you process being forced to watch a loved one being abused, and you're forced to stand there, powerless to help them? Listen to this from historyonthenet.com. Slave punishments in the antebellum American South. Now we know some of these things happened in the North as well. The slavery practiced in the United States prior to the Civil War was the legal establishment of human chattel enslavement, primarily but not exclusively of Africans and their descendants. Chattel slavery is so named because the enslaved are the personal property of the owners, again, objectification, and bought and sold as a commodity. And the status of slave was imposed on the enslaved from birth. This form of slavery is in contrast to other forms such as bonded labor, in which a person pledged him or herself against a loan. In chattel slavery, the limits of slave punishments were only set by the masters, as they had the legal right to do whatever they wished. Therefore, slaves in the American South experienced horrific levels of brutality. The more serious the crime committed, the more severe the punishment. Plantation owners often made the other slaves watch the punishment to prevent them from slacking at work or trying to run away. So does it matter whether or not the abuse is happening to you? You're still being traumatized just by watching. You can't comfort that person. You can't help in any way. You're almost forced to detach yourself from it. What does this do for men who are forced to watch women go through something like this? How will this affect the husband and the father who's supposed to protect? He has to think that he has failed at being a protector. Keep our highest value in mind as I talk about this. What does this do for a woman forced to watch her husband, son, father, or brother go through this? The message you're getting is that he can't protect me. He can't protect himself. So we have learned how to mask our pain by disconnecting from our true feelings. We've learned how to detach ourselves from the pain of others. Let's keep going with this. I want to share 3 verses from the Book of Lamentations. If you have not read the book, I encourage you to read it. The Book of Lamentations is a book of sorrowful songs, or some would say poems. And the name implies that it's expressing grief or sorrow, to cry about something. It was written soon after the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. Now, like the book of Job, Lamentations it's giving us a picture of a man bewildered or confused by the results of evil and suffering. The difference is that Job didn't know why he was suffering. The writer of Lamentations did. He knew that it was the result of the people's continued and unrepentant idolatry. So listen, it says, "How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow she is, who was great among the nations. The princes among the provinces has become a slave. She weeps bitterly in the night. Her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into captivity. Under affliction and hard servitude, she dwells among the nations. She finds no rest. All her persecutors overtake her in dire straits. So just think about this. Our disobedience and rebellion led to a judgment that got us kicked out of our land, and we found ourselves being sifted among the nations. The disorders that Dr. Joy just described is an outcome of the sifting. The first step in the process of sifting is to loosen the chaff from the edible grain, which is called threshing. And as she said, we are broken, and for a lot of us detached. If you remember, our primary value was relationships. Let's look at this list of some of the symptoms of PTSD, because we will see some of the same symptoms plaguing our people. Negative thoughts about yourself, other people, or the world. Many of us are dealing with self-hate. The cruelties we faced over the centuries taught us to hate almost everything about ourselves. The Europeans were glamorized. They were portrayed as the standard for beauty. So we've hated the dark skin, the kinky hair, the big lips, and for our women, even the shape of our body. We were made fun of for the big hips and the butt. Interestingly, though, there's a lot of money being made now in the tanning salons and folks getting butt injections, but that's another topic. But let's go back to the list. Hopelessness about the future. She mentioned that. Memory problems, including not remembering important aspects of the traumatic event. Just because we weren't there does not mean those disorders or those coping mechanisms did not pass down through the generations. Difficulty maintaining close relationships. We're going to be focusing on that one primarily. Feeling detached from family and friends. Lack of interest in activities you once enjoyed. Difficulty experiencing positive emotions. Feeling emotionally numb. Here's the sad part. Because our family structure was so severely destroyed, when we're in pain, most of us cry alone. Just let that marinate for a bit. A lot of us put on our best face when we're together. We put on our mask to make it seem like we're strong and we're tough. And yes, it's hard, but we'll get through it. And it's only when we're alone that we're free to show our true emotions. We find it hard to trust others with our pain. Where did that come from? Shouldn't we find comfort in those who should understand, those who have been there too? Going back to the statement Dr. Joy made, if our highest value was in our relationships, do you see why we're struggling so much with our relationships? We lost the ability to see each other. Daughters of Zion, do you really see our brothers, husbands, and sons when they hurt? Sons of Zion, can you really see the pain of the daughters of Zion? We stopped looking at each other to focus on our own hurt. Maybe it's time to stop and look each other in the eyes and ask, can you see me? Can you see my pain? I need you to see me. You need to see me. I need to see you. It's only then that we will see that we all have scars from the chains that kept us in bondage. Don't get me wrong. Seeing me does not mean that you excuse bad behavior or condone it. Seeing me also means you're willing to risk it all to speak the truth in love because you desire my good and not my hurt. When we understand that the judgment fell upon all of us and none of us escaped its effect, it should give us a greater desire for the restoration of our family. Yes, this has been hard. But here's a word of inspiration. Even though we're being sifted, where are we? Right in the Master's hands. So let's continue reading, and you're going to see a very abrupt transition from verse 10 to verse 11. It says, "In that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, and close up the breaches thereof. And I will raise up his ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old." The sword of judgment quickly changes to talk of reconstruction and renewal. Israel is restored. He's talking about blessing and abundance now. So the Most High promised to take what was ruined and to repair and rebuild. Notice that he didn't start all over with something new. Let's look at verse 12. That they, speaking of Israel, may possess, they're going to own the remnant of Edom and of all the heathen which are called by my name, saith the Lord that doeth this. Now I do want to draw your attention to this statement because some interpret this to mean that Gentiles will become Israel. This verse does not read that way in the Septuagint. So I have it below so that you can have clarity about what this verse is saying. He's saying that among the heathens, some will be calling upon his name. They will earnestly seek him. There's only one group of people called by his name, and that's Israel. Let's go on to verse 13. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him that soweth seed. And the mountains shall drop sweet wine, and all the hills shall melt. Do you see what's happening here? He's restoring things. When this time of restoration comes, the fruit will be super abundant. You really need to see what's happening. Normally the one plowing and the one reaping are not in the field at the same time. So this is saying that the harvests are so great that before the one reaping can gather in the crop, it's time for the one who will be plowing to come in and prepare for the next crop. So during this time of restoration, those separated because they're working in a certain season will be bumping into each other. In other words, the harvest is so big that the plowman and the reaper won't have time to let the other finish their work. Now, this is what we call abundance. So it says, and I will bring again the captivity of my people Israel, and they shall build the waste city. Israel is building it, and inhabit them. They're going to live in these cities. And they shall plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof. They shall also make gardens and eat the fruit of them. And I will plant them upon their land. Remember the sifting? Getting rid of everything, the chaff, everything that shouldn't be there. Now you have a really good seed that will be planted in their own land, and they shall no more be pulled up out of their land, which I have given them, saith the Lord thy God. As I bring this to an end, I want you to remember that the Most High sifting only eliminates the chaff, never the grain. Not even the smallest grain will fall to the ground. For years, we didn't even know why we were suffering, why we were hated all around the world. And now we know. We suffered because of the same reasons our ancestors suffered: continued sin and idolatry. Now we know why we have a Book of Lamentations. We've been here before. What's amazing is that it's not the blessings that helped us to identify ourselves in these last days. No. The fulfillment of Scripture is that the curses would be the signs that points to our identity. I believe that it's also a sign of who we are, that the Most High didn't allow us to be utterly destroyed. Dr. Joy said that we're resilient, and I agree with that to a certain degree. Resilient, but broken. Resilient in that we keep getting back up, but to look at us, you see the walking wounded. But Psalm 107:20 says, He sent His word to heal us and deliver us from destruction. Our healing can only come from our Heavenly Father. So in the next session, we will continue talking about the many ways we reject Jacob. Even in the awakening, we have trouble seeing past our pain. I will also leave the links for the 2 videos I used in the description for those who may want to watch it in its entirety. Remember to hit like and be sure to share this message with someone. And join me next time. Shalom, everyone.